This week has been dominated by news of a US-China Phase 1 trade deal, but Alex Capri, you have just authored a report which is essentially about technological decoupling. And I'm wondering, where do these two huge stories sit in a line with one another?
Well, you know, the trade deal and the negotiations which are focused on tariffs are in a completely different space. These are parallel universes, right? So we have tariffs on the one hand, and then we have the US-China technology rivalry on the other hand, where a number of things are playing out, including the Huawei scenario with the 5G issues. So these are completely disjointed, they're completely divergent issues.
And this is something that, having read your report, it seems almost like an unstoppable force. So regardless of what some people perceive to be some progress in terms of the actual thawing in the trade relationship, this the tech war as you have it, this is something that's not going away anytime soon.
So think of the trade war, if you will, as a subset in a much larger overarching rivalry, a systemic rivalry between two superpowers, which is really the defining issue of this decade and this century. And they will continue to decouple when it comes to sensitive technologies, military type technologies, dual use technologies. So that is really the future.
So you talk about military technology, dual use technology. Why should the average man on the street care about these things?
Well, a big part of this rivalry is who sets the standards. Who sets the standards internationally for 5G? Who sets standards around all the other Internet of Things and the connectivity of issues? And of course, at the heart of those technologies are semiconductors. So what this is going to do is we're going to see a fracturing world. We're going to see global value chains basically breaking up, more localization, more ring fencing of operations and manufacturing. And that means that the man on the street is going to be dealing with devices that have completely different standards, or standards that aren't universally compatible. So that's an immediate impact to the consumer.
Do you see this becoming like almost like two separate tech landscapes, separate technological civilizations, a bipolar tech world? And is that something that you can see stymieing what has until now, for decades now, been the exponential development of consumer technology?
Yeah, well, think about it. The last 3 decades of globalization, you've had research and development spilling across borders. You've had collaborative networks when it comes to the development of a lot of these technologies, both with Chinese companies, American companies, and companies from all over the world. As we see this new scenario emerging, it means that those collaborative networks are also being fractured. That means that human capital is being sliced up and diced up around the world. And so a lot of the benefits, the economies of scale that we saw in the emergence of globalization over the past 3 decades, that's going away.
So if you take it to the nth degree, and this week a lot of people have been trying to pick a winner from the Phase 1 trade deal. If this tech war is taken to the nth degree, in the short term and in the long term, which of these sides do you see as losing the most?
It's not a zero-sum game. In the long term, everybody loses because we lose all those benefits that I just described. In the short term, particularly when we're speaking of semiconductors, if, for example, you have the application of export controls and technology controls applied by the Americans, by the Europeans together, and even potentially by the Taiwanese and the Japanese and others, then the short-term loser is absolutely China because of their huge dependence. It's a major Achilles heel. They have a huge dependence on foreign and U.S. technology in particular when it comes to semiconductors.
Sure, and you talk here about the need for the US to work with allies, erstwhile allies, European Union, Japan, Taiwan, and so on. We've seen little indication in is it 3 years now of President Trump that he's willing to build the requisite bridges in order to form this coalition of allies, which many talk about. Do you see this as being a viable prospect in the immediate term?
I do. I think a lot of the abrasiveness that we're seeing with the Trump administration and traditional allies is around tariffs. But when we talk about the tech issue, there is a fair amount of cooperation going on, and I expect that to increase. In fact, the European Union has approached the United States asking for the development of joint industrial policy around technology, for example. So I see that absolutely increasing, particularly this race to set standards that I mentioned earlier. So I think, again, two completely different parallel planes. Tariffs is one issue, but certainly when it comes to the tech war, that's a completely different ballgame.
Certainly something to keep an eye on. Alex Capri, thank you very much for joining us.